Dobadura Airfield, Papua New Guinea, November 5th, 1943, 02:17. The world tore itself apart in sound. Flight Sergeant Jack O'Reilly was awake before the first crump of the explosion. The air in the humid bark and tin hut didn't just carry the sound, it became the sound. A solid, vibrating wall of pressure that punched his chest. "Red!" a voice screamed from the darkness. "Condition red! Get to the trench!" Jacko was already moving. He grabbed his steel helmet and his boots, not bothering with the laces. He and his young apprentice, Corporal Bluey Dawson, spilled out of the hut into a night illuminated by strobing flashes. The jungle, a black, suffocating mass by day, was now a flickering green nightmare. The smell hit him instantly, a cocktail of ozone, cordite, and the damp, sickly sweet reek of jungle mold. "This way, Jacko!" Bluey yelled, pulling him toward the nearest slit trench, a muddy scar in the earth. The anti-aircraft batteries at the edge of the strip opened up. Thump, 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 their tracers clawing desperately at the unseen bombers. The Japanese were high tonight, pattern bombing. They weren't aiming for the men, they were aiming for the machines. Jacko and Bluey fell into the trench, landing in 6 inches of lukewarm water. They pressed their backs against the slick clay wall. A stick of bombs walked across the dispersal bays. The ground bucked and heaved. Whump, whump, whump. Closer. Whump crack. A column of earth, metal, and fire erupted not 50 yards away, where the boneyard lay. The boneyard was Jacko's graveyard, a tangle of wrecked airframes, salvaged wings, and dead engines that he and his ground crew cannibalized for parts. A piece of shrapnel, white-hot, sang past Jacko's ear and thwacked into the dirt bank opposite. "Bloody hell," Bluey whispered, his voice cracking. He was 19, a farm boy from Wagga Wagga who had never seen an ocean before the troopship. Jacko put a steadying, grease-stained hand on the young man's shoulder. "Stay down, mate. They're just rattling the windows." The roar of the Mitsubishi engines faded, moving south toward the next target. The all-clear siren wouldn't sound for another hour, but the immediate danger had passed. The sudden silence was almost as deafening as the explosions, filled now by the frantic chirping of jungle insects and the distant, agonizing screech of tortured metal settling. One of their last operational B-25 Mitchell bombers, the Kookaburra, had been parked near the boneyard. Jacko was already climbing out of the trench before the mud had settled. "Come on, Bluey, bring a torch. Let's see the damage." He didn't run. He walked with the grim, determined pace of a man who has to fix the unfixable. The bomb hadn't hit the boneyard. It had hit the plain next to the boneyard, and the blast had thrown the wreckage of a long-dead USAAF B-25 onto the Kookaburra. Jacko shone his torch beam through the acrid smoke. The port wing of the Kookaburra was crushed, its undercarriage shattered. The fuselage, their precious, hard-to-get flying fuselage, was buckled. She wasn't a plane anymore. She was just more junk for the boneyard. Bluey let out a low whistle. "She's rooted, Jacko. Completely rooted." Jacko didn't say anything. He just stood there in the mud, the torch beam playing over the twisted aluminum. He was the senior mechanic for number 18, Netherlands East Indies. Squadron RAF. He had 12 pilots, 6 navigators, and 6 bombers. Now he had 5. And in New Guinea in 1943, there were no replacements. The war in the Southwest Pacific was not the war seen in the newsreels from Europe. This was not a war of grand tank divisions or sweeping aerial armadas. This was a war of mud, malaria, and mountains. By late 1943, the tide had technically turned. Kokoda was a memory, and the Allies were on the offensive, clawing their way up the New Guinea coastline. The strategy, devised by General MacArthur, was island hopping, a brutal game of leapfrog that aimed to cut off and starve the vast Japanese garrisons, most notably the fortress of Rabaul. The key to this strategy was air power, not the high-altitude strategic bombing of Germany, but the gritty, low-level skip bombing and strafing runs that could sever Japanese supply lines, sink their Tokyo Express convoys, and pound their island airfields into coral dust. This was the job of the RAAF and the USAAF 5th Air Force. They were the tip of the spear, and the B-25 Mitchell bomber was their primary weapon. But this spear was being wielded at the end of the world's longest, thinnest supply line. Every bullet, Every engine, every bolt, and every bottle of quinine had to travel 7,000 miles by sea from America, or 2,000 miles from Australia. No, 18 NEI. Squadron was a perfect example of this logistical nightmare. A unique hybrid unit. Its air crews were Dutch, escaping the fall of the East Indies, while its ground crews, the mechanics, armorers, and fitters, were almost entirely Australian. They flew American-built planes under RAAF command from a captured Japanese airstrip that was little more than a muddy gash in the jungle. Their CO, squadron leader Thomas, a pragmatic Brit who had flown with the Dutch in Java, was under constant pressure. His orders were simple. You will maintain a minimum of 6 operational aircraft for daily interdiction missions against Rabaul. It was an impossible order. The conditions at Dobodura were an engineer's hell. The humidity was a living entity, a hot, wet blanket that rusted tools in hours and bred a vibrant green mold on wiring looms overnight. The runway was Marston matting, steel planks laid over mud that buckled, sank, and became a lethal, tire-shredding mess. Worse, there was the bureaucracy of distance. When Jack O'Reilly needed a replacement supercharger for a Wright R2600 engine, he couldn't just call supply. He had to fill out RAAF Form EA6, which was sent by runner to the signals tent, radioed in code to Port Moresby, telegraphed to Brisbane, and then put on a ship in San Francisco 6 weeks later. By the time the part arrived, if it arrived at all, the plane it was meant for was often a wreck. The central problem was simple. The squadron was losing aircraft to enemy action, to accidents, and to the jungle itself, faster than they could be replaced. They were being bled white, not by bullets, but by attrition. Each plane grounded was a victory for the enemy. After the air raid, squadron leader Thomas stood with Jacko in the gray, misty light of dawn, looking at the remains of the Kookaburra. "Can you fix it, Riley?" Thomas asked. His voice was flat. Jacko wiped his hands on a rag that was already black with grease. "Fix her?" "No, sir. The fuselage is snapped. She'll never fly again." Thomas kicked at a clod of mud. "That makes 3 this week. We're down to 4 operational birds. 4. And HQ wants a maximum effort strike on the Wewak convoy." He looked at Jacko, his eyes hollow with fatigue. "We are failing, Flight Sergeant. We can't do the job." Jacko looked at the wreck. Then he looked past it, at the sprawling, tangled mass of the boneyard. "No, sir," Jacko said, his voice quiet. "We can't fix her. But we might be able to use her." Thomas looked at him, confused. But Jacko's gaze was already distant, calculating. He was staring at the graveyard, but he wasn't seeing junk. He was seeing ingredients. The next week was a slow-motion disaster. The squadron's operational rhythm fell apart. Routine failure became the new normal. November 7th, 1943, Tendora B-25, Waltzing Matilda, returned from a reconnaissance mission, trailing smoke. One engine was dead, the other coughing. The pilot, a young Dutchman named Van der Haas, put her down hard. The landing gear, already stressed, collapsed. The plane skidded off the matting into the mud, a ground loop that tore the propellers from their hubs. Van der Haas climbed out, shaking. The flak was thick. Jacko and his crew spent 2 days trying to salvage the engines. But the damage was too great. The propeller shafts were bent, the casings cracked. "We need new props, sir," Jacko reported to Thomas. "And new engines to attach them to, I suppose," Thomas said, rubbing his temples. "Yes, sir." "File the report, Riley. Put it in the queue." Jacko knew what that meant. The queue was a fiction. Waltzing Matilda was now grounded. Total operational aircraft, 3. November 9th, 1943, 14:30. The pilots grew restless. They were hunters, but their weapons were broken. They sat in the mess tent, a humid canvas box, drinking bitter, lukewarm tea and swatting at flies. "We can't hit Rabaul with apologies, Jacko," one of the pilots, a fiery Australian named Red Hogan, on loan from another squadron, complained. "The Japs are running convoys in broad daylight. They're getting cocky." "I'm doing what I can, Red," Jacko said, not looking up from the carburetor he was meticulously cleaning with precious, hoarded petrol. "What we need is what the Yanks have," another pilot muttered. "They ground a bird, they fly a new one in the next day. We ground one, and you blokes have to sticky tape it back together. The insult stung, but Jacko knew it was just frustration. We're short on sticky tape, mate. November 11th, 1943, 08. The official response to Jacko's request for new engines and undercarriage components for the Kookaburra and Waltzing Matilda came back from Moresby. Your wreck A44B, supply ETA. 6 to 8 weeks, awaiting confirmation from us. Lend-lease, reevaluate salvage potential. 6 to 8 weeks, Thomas said, crumbling the paper in his fist. In 8 weeks, this war will be over one way or another. They want us to reevaluate salvage potential. What does that even mean? It means we're on our own, sir, Jacko said. The desperation was palpable. The squadron was dying. Not in a blaze of glory, but in a slow, muddy bureaucratic rot. They had pilots who couldn't fly and mechanics who had nothing left to fix. That evening, Jacko didn't go to the mess. He walked back to the boneyard. The moon was high, bathing the metallic corpses in a ghostly silver light. He walked past the wreck of the Kookaburra. He walked past Waltzing Matilda, already being stripped for its radios. He stopped in front of a third wreck. This one was American. A B-25C that had crash-landed 2 months ago, its tail section completely sheared off by a tree. The USAF recovery team had taken the guns, the radios, and the bomb site, then officially struck it from inventory. It was worthless. Jacko walked, and he looked. He saw the Kookaburra's intact, if buckled, fuselage. He saw the American wreck's intact, undamaged nose and wing roots. He saw Waltzing Matilda's 2 perfectly good, if propellerless, engines. And he saw a fourth wreck, a burned-out husk from a strafing attack, whose tail section and vertical stabilizers were miraculously untouched. The routine failure wasn't the problem. The problem was thinking in routines. The problem was trying to fix one plane. Jacko Riley wasn't going to fix a plane. He was going to build one. Flight Sergeant Jack Riley was not an engineer. He had no degree, no formal training in aeronautical stress tolerances. He was a mechanic. He'd grown up in the Queensland outback, on a 1,000-acre sheep station that was always one drought away from ruin. In that world, nothing was ever new. When the family's only tractor, a 1920s Fordson, threw a rod, you didn't order a new one. You waited for the neighbor to drive to town, a 3-day trip, or you made one. Young Jack had spent his teenage years forging, welding, and jury-rigging complex machinery with little more than fencing wire, a blacksmith's hammer, and a stubborn refusal to be beaten. He saw machines not as a collection of parts on a schematic, but as systems. He understood in his bones how they breathed, how they balanced, how they worked. The RAF, in its desperate need for skilled hands, had snapped him up in 1940. They tried to make him an officer, but he failed the academic tests. He was happier with a spanner in his hand. He was a natural. He could diagnose a misfiring engine by its sound, a hydraulic leak by its smell. Now, standing in the boneyard, that outback mind kicked in. The RAF technical manual said a B-25 fuselage, once buckled, was scrap. The manual said a B-25C wing could not be mated to a B-25D engine cowling. The manual said you could not take the tail of one plane and bolt it onto the body of another. The manual, Jacko thought, had never been to Dobadura. He walked back to his hut and pulled out a stub of a pencil and a dog-eared notebook. He didn't sketch a plane. He sketched a map. Fuselage, the Kookaburra, RAF B-25D. Buckled, but the main cabin and bomb bay are solid. Nose cockpit, the Yank, USAAF B-25C. Tail is gone, but the front half, including the cockpit, glass, and controls, is pristine. Engines, Waltzing Matilda. Both R-2600s are good. We just need props. He'd steal those from a damaged transport if he had to. Tail section, the burnout. Unknown B-25. Everything forward of the waist gunner position was ash, but the twin tails and rudders were perfect. The spark wasn't a single eureka. It was a slow, grinding calculation. He wasn't building a B-25. He was building a bomber, a composite, a Bitzer. He knew instantly the problems. The B-25C and D models had different electrical wiring. The control cables for the rudders would have to be restrung and retensioned by hand, a task of near impossible precision. The C-model nose section would have to be cut from its fuselage and the D-model fuselage cut from its cockpit, and the two halves spliced together. It was insane. It was surgery with a hacksaw. He sat on his cot, the humidity thick around him, and listened to the distant crump of artillery practice. He thought about the pilots, drinking their bitter tea, grounded. He thought about the Japanese convoy, steaming south, unmolested. He picked up the pencil again and began to calculate rivet patterns. November 12, 1943, 070, the officers' mess tent. Squadron leader Thomas was in a meeting with his engineering officer, Flight Lieutenant Davies, when Jack O'Reilly walked in. Jacko was not invited. He was covered in grease from the night's work, his khaki shirt dark with sweat. He held his grimy notebook in his hand. Davies, a sharp-featured man from Melbourne who lived and died by the RAF technical manuals, looked up in annoyance. "Flight Sergeant, we are in a meeting." "Sir, it's about the aircraft," Jacko said, his voice flat. He looked past Davies at Thomas. "I can get you a plane." Thomas leaned forward, his fatigue replaced by a flicker of interest. "You can fix Kookaburra?" "No, sir," Jacko said. He opened his notebook and laid it on the rickety table next to a half-eaten tin of bully beef. His pencil sketches were crude, but clear. "I can build you one, from the boneyard." Davies picked up the notebook, his lip curling in disdain. He flipped a page. This is a joke. You want to mate a C-model cockpit to a D-model fuselage? With the tail assembly from God knows what? Flight Sergeant, this is not a Queensland tractor. This is a 20-ton bomber." "I know what it is, sir," Jacko said, his voice steeling. "The stress tolerances will be completely unknown," Davies argued, turning to Thomas. "The center of gravity will be off. The wiring looms are incompatible. It will, without question, tear itself apart in mid-air. It's a death trap. And it's a gross violation of RAF Technical Order 11B40 section." "The Japs," Jacko interrupted, "aren't reading Technical Order 11B40, sir. They're dropping bombs on us." The tent went silent. An enlisted man did not interrupt an officer. Thomas looked from Davies's outraged face to Jacko's stubborn one. He looked at the sketches. "How long, Riley?" Thomas asked quietly. Davies scoffed. "Sir, you can't be serious." "How long?" Thomas repeated. Jacko hesitated. "Give me Bluey and a full crew. Keep the brass off my back, and I'll need the Seabees tractor." The U.S. Naval Construction Battalion, Seabees, had a battered but functional Caterpillar D8 tractor they used for clearing jungle. They guarded it like gold. 2 weeks, Jacko said. Thomas shook his head. "The convoy will be in range in 5 days. We need it by then." "Sir, that's impossible," Davies protested. Jacko didn't blink. "I can't do it in 5, give me 10. "You have 7, Thomas said. "Starting now. Get the tractor. Don't tell me how, just get it." He turned to Davies. "Flight Lieutenant, you will officially note that the Kookaburra and the American wreck are being scrapped for parts. That is all." "Understood?" Davies's face was white. "But sir, the paperwork, the airframe, it won't have a serial number." "Then we'll paint one on," Thomas said, dismissing him. He looked at Jacko. 7 days, Flight Sergeant. Don't make me regret this." Jacko simply nodded. "Righto, sir." He walked out. His first step wasn't to the boneyard. It was to the supply tent. He pocketed 2 bottles of borrowed officer's whiskey. November 12, 1943, 21 Wo. The CB camp. Jacko found the CB chief petty officer in his tent. The tractor keys were hanging on a board. "2 bottles of good scotch, Chief," Jacko said, "for you to not see me liberate that tractor for about 72 hours. The CB looked at the bottles, then at the Australian. "Make it 3, and you can have the fuel cans too." Jacko grinned. "Done." November 13th, 1943, 05 Lounge. The workshop. They didn't have a hangar. Jacko's workshop was a dispersal bay at the far end of the airfield, hidden from the main strip by a wall of towering 100-foot-tall trees and camouflaged with palm fronds. The work began in the pre-dawn gloom. The clank thud of the Caterpillar tractor's treads was the starting gun. The first task was a monster. They had to move the three main sections, the American cockpit, the kookaburra fuselage, and the burnout tail, into one place. The tractor, driven by a grinning Jacko, dragged the sections through the mud, the screech of metal on earth setting everyone's teeth on edge. "Righto, lads!" Jacko yelled over the noise to his hand-picked crew of 6. "We're not building a show pony. We're building a workhorse. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to fly." The technical challenges were immediate and brutal. Day 1-2. The splice. They had no crane. To lift the heavy cockpit section, Jacko and his team built a massive bipod lift from thick coconut logs, using salvaged winch cable from a wrecked Jeep. The real surgery was the splice. They had to cut the buckled cockpit from the kookaburra and the damaged tail from the American fuselage. They used hacksaws, cold chisels, and one precious, jealously guarded oxyacetylene torch. Scree, thunk, ping. The smell of hot metal and ozone filled the air. When they finally had the two clean sections, the American cockpit and the Australian fuselage, they had to join them. "It's not lining up," Bluey yelled, his arms shaking as he held a rivet gun. "The D-model fuselage is 3 inches wider at the bulkhead." "Then make it fit," Jacko roared. For 2 days they hammered, bent, and riveted. They didn't have the factory-standard aluminum rivets. They used steel bolts from a wrecked truck, adding hundreds of pounds of extra weight. Davies, the engineering officer, walked by once, took one look at the crude, non-standard join, shook his head, and walked away, muttering about court-martials. Day 3-4. The wings and engines. The wings were a patchwork. The port wing was from Kookaburra, the starboard wing from the American wreck. They were almost identical. Almost, as Bluey discovered, means the fuel lines don't match up. Jacko spent 4 hours in the cramped, suffocatingly hot wing route, rerouting rubber fuel hoses by hand, his knuckles bleeding. Then came the engines. They salvaged the 2 R-2600s from Waltzing Matilda and mounted them. But they had no propellers. "Right," Jacko said. "Bluey, you're with me. We're going shopping." They drove the tractor to the USAAF transport depot in broad daylight and liberated 2 3-bladed propellers from a C-47 transport plane that was listed as awaiting parts. "These won't fit," Bluey protested. "The gearing is different." "They'll fit," Jacko said grimly. "We'll rebush the hub." Day 5-6. The nerves. This was the worst part, the nerves of the aircraft, the hydraulics, the control cables, and the electrical wiring. The B-25C, American cockpit, used a 12-volt electrical system. The B-25D, Australian fuselage, used a 24-volt system. "It's apples and bloody oranges, Jacko," Bluey said, holding up 2 massive looms of color-coded wires. They were on their 40th straight hour of work, fueled by caffeine and sheer stubbornness. The mosquitoes were a humming, unbearable cloud around the single hurricane lamp. "So, we build a new system," Jacko said. For 72 hours, Jacko and Bluey did not sleep. They traced, cut, and spliced. They took the 24-volt generator from the D-model engine and ran it to a new junction box they built from bakelite and scrap copper. They bypassed half the circuits, focusing only on essentials: flight controls, engine instruments, bomb bay doors. No landing lights, Jacko decided. No cabin heat, Bluey added. No cigarette lighter. The pilot will be spewing. He'll live. Day 7. The skin. The plane was assembled. But it was a monster. It was a patchwork of RAF camouflage green, bare, scratched aluminum from the American wreck, and the blackened, soot-stained tail. It was ugly, angular, and looked like it had been in a fight and lost. The crew stood back exhausted, their hands cut and burned, their clothes stiff with grease and dried sweat. What do we call it?" Bluey asked, his voice a rasp. Jacko spat a stream of tobacco juice. "She's a Bitzer, a proper mongrel." He picked up a can of yellow paint. On the nose, under the cockpit, he painted the name, the Mongrel 7 Days. They had done it. November 19th, 1943, 15 Re. The Dispersal Bay. The Mongrel sat squat and heavy in the mud, sunlight glinting off its mismatched skin. It didn't look like a bomber. It looked like an insult to aviation. Squadron Leader Thomas was there, his face an unreadable mask. Flight Lieutenant Davies was with him, holding a clipboard, ready to document the inevitable failure. Jacko's entire ground crew, skeletal with fatigue, stood in a silent semicircle. "She's ready, sir," Jacko said. He didn't salute. He just wiped his hands on his trousers. "Does it work?" Thomas asked. "Only one way to find out," Jacko said. He nodded to Bluey, who was already in the co-pilot's seat. Jacko climbed into the pilot's seat. "You're not a pilot, Riley," Davies snapped. "I don't need to fly her to start her," Jacko retorted. "I just need to know if the nerves are connected." He ran through a modified from-memory checklist. Fuel cocks. On. Magnetos. Set. "Righto, Bluey," Jacko said, his voice quiet in the cockpit. "Give her a kick in the guts." Bluey hit the starter for the port engine. Whine. Clank. Silence. Davies smirked and made a note on his clipboard. "Fuel prime," Jacko yelled. "Give it more prime. She's thirsty." Bluey pumped the primer handle 3 times. "Again," Jacko yelled. Bluey hit the starter. Whine. Sputter. Cough. A cloud of oily black smoke erupted from the port exhaust. The engine caught, sputtered, and died. "One more time," Jacko said, his jaw tight. Whine. Cough. Sputter. And then, a sound that shook the jungle. Roar. The Wright R2600 engine exploded into life, flames spitting from the short exhaust stacks. The sound was deafening, a glorious hammering thunder. The whole airframe rattled, and a rivet from the fuselage splice popped out and pinged onto the wing. Jacko didn't care. He was listening. The engine wasn't just running, it was smooth. "Starboard!" he yelled. Bluey hit the second starter. The starboard engine, the good one, caught instantly. Roar! The ground shook. The palm fronds camouflaging the bay were blasted flat by the prop wash. Jacko and Bluey sat in the cockpit as the machine vibrated around them. The hundreds of mismatched parts suddenly, violently, becoming a single, living thing. Jacko throttled them up, his eyes on the instruments. The oil pressure was good. Hydraulics, green. The new wiring wasn't on fire. He throttled back to a low, rumbling idle. He turned to Bluey, a rare, cracked-toothed grin spreading across his grease-stained face. "She'll fly." He climbed out. Thomas was standing there, his arms crossed. He had to yell over the din of the engines. "She's a pig, Riley." "She's our pig, sir." Davies was staring, his clipboard forgotten. "The center of gravity is fine," Jacko yelled. "She's heavy in the nose, but the tail surfaces are big enough to compensate. She'll be stable." Thomas looked at the plane, then at Jacko, then at the sky. The Japanese convoy was 200 miles out and closing. "Get her armed," Thomas said. "She flies at 0500. November 20th, 1943, 0455, Dobadura runway." The humidity of the pre-dawn was so thick, the air felt like wet velvet. The mongrel sat at the end of the Marston matting, its engines idling with a low, uneven rumble. It was loaded with 4 500-pound bombs and a full complement of 50 caliber ammunition. The crew was a scratch crew. The pilot would be Squadron Leader Thomas himself. "If my mechanic is crazy enough to build it," he'd said, "I'm crazy enough to fly it." His co-pilot was Van der Haas, the Dutchman who had ground-looped waltzing Matilda. He wanted his revenge. Jacko stood by the cockpit doing a final check. "She's heavy on the port side, sir," Jacko explained, shouting over the engines. "The wing is heavier and the C-model cockpit is offset. You'll need to trim right." "A lot of trim." "And the controls?" Thomas asked. "They'll be stiff. I rerouted the cables. They're tight. Don't fight her. Persuade her." Thomas nodded, his face grim. He pulled his flight goggles down. "Thank you, Flight Sergeant. Now get clear." Jacko stepped back and gave a short, sharp salute. He and Bluey stood on the edge of the strip, their hearts in their throats. Thomas pushed the throttles forward. The mongrel roared. She did not accelerate. She lumbered. The plane was overweight by at least 1,000 pounds. All those steel bolts, the re-welded joints, the mismatched plates. She chewed up the runway. Halfway, 3/4. "She's not going to make it," Bluey whispered, his hands clenched. "She'll make it," Jacko said, though he wasn't breathing. The end of the runway was coming up fast. Thomas was holding the plane down, building every last knot of speed. At the last possible second, he hauled back on the yoke. The mongrel did not lift. It staggered into the air, clearing the 100-foot trees at the end of the strip by what looked like inches. It wallowed, the port wing dipping dangerously. For a terrifying second, it looked like it would stall and fall. Then, the engines bit, and it began to climb, a slow, ugly, magnificent ascent into the dark sky. 0730, over the Solomon Sea. "There," Vanderhaas pointed. "Smoke on the horizon." They found the convoy, 2 transports and a destroyer, just as the intelligence said. Thomas pushed the nose down, and the plane fought him. The stiffness Jacko had warned about was a nightmare. Thomas was using both hands and his full body weight to keep the plane level. "Zeros, 2 o'clock high!" the top turret gunner screamed. 2 Mitsubishi A6M Zeros, the deadliest fighters in the Pacific, were peeling off from their combat air patrol, diving on the lone slow bomber. "Hold on!" Thomas yelled. He shoved the yoke forward, diving toward the sea for a low-level attack. The mongrel creaked. A high-pitched squeal filled the cockpit, the sound of the overstressed, mismatched fuselage splice. A rivet in the cockpit popped with the force of a bullet and ricocheted off the instrument panel. "She's coming apart!" Vanderhaas yelled. "She'll hold!" Thomas roared, his knuckles white. Tracer rounds zipped past the canopy. The Zeros were fast, but the mongrel was tough. The extra plating and steel bolts that made her heavy also made her strong. "Turrets jammed!" the gunner yelled. The salvaged electricals, stressed by the dive, had failed. "Bugger it," Thomas said. "We're going in." He leveled out at 50 feet, heading straight for the lead transport. This was skip bombing. The Japanese destroyer opened up. Puffs of flak blossomed around the plane. Shrapnel ripped through the port wing, but missed the jury-rigged fuel line. "Now!" Thomas hit the bomb release. The 4 500-pounders, released by Jacko's hand-spliced wiring, dropped clean. The bombs skipped across the water like stones and slammed into the side of the transport. The mongrel flew directly over the ship as it erupted. The shockwave was so powerful, it threw the heavy bomber 30 feet into the air. "Pull up! Pull up!" Vanderhaas screamed. Thomas was already fighting the plane, which was now trailing hydraulic fluid from a flak hit. 1-0, overconfident, followed them into the explosion and was obliterated. The other, seeing the transport break in two, peeled away, likely low on fuel. 0915, WW2 airfield. The landing was a controlled crash. The portside landing gear, the one Jacko had borrowed from the C-47, collapsed on impact. The plane veered off the runway, one wing digging into the mud, and screeched to a halt. Silence. Then, the cockpit canopy opened. Thomas and Vanderhaas climbed out. They were soaked in sweat and hydraulic fluid. Jacko and his crew were already there in a jeep. Thomas walked over to Jacko. He didn't say a word. He just stood there for a second, breathing. "She's a pig, Riley," Thomas said, his voice hoarse. "A bloody, wallowing, suicidal pig." Jacko nodded. "Yes, sir." "The port wing is shot to hell. The turret is dead, and the landing gear is scrap." "Yes, sir." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder hard. "Get her patched up. She flies again tomorrow." The flight of the mongrel was like a rock dropped in a still pond. The ripples spread fast. At first, it was just squadron lore. The bitzer that sunk a transport. But the mongrel didn't just fly once. It became the squadron's workhorse. It was always available because Jacko and his crew knew its every quirk. When a normal B-25 was grounded for a regulation part, the mongrel was patched with a piece of steel from a petrol drum and sent back up. It was ugly, it was dangerous, and the pilots loved it. It had character, and it always came back. December 4th, 1943. WW2. The domino effect began when a visiting USAAF colonel attached to General Kenny's 5th Air Force Command landed at WW2. His name was Colonel Hap Irvine, a logistics man. He was there to inspect the RAF squadron's abysmal maintenance record and low operational readiness. He found a squadron with 100% operational readiness. He was walking the flight line with squadron leader Thomas when he saw the mongrel being bombed up for a mission. He stopped dead. Irvine. What in the Sam Hill is that, squadron leader? Thomas. That, Colonel, is the Mongrel, our top-scoring bird this month. Irvine. It looks like 4 different airplanes. Thomas. 2.5, sir, with a few bits of a C-47 thrown in. Built by my flight sergeant here. Jacko was called over. He explained in his blunt, technical way what he had done. He didn't speak of innovation, he spoke of necessity. We were short on bits, sir, so we used what we had. Irvin, a man who understood the brutal math of logistics, wasn't looking at the plane. He was looking at the boneyard. He saw not a graveyard, but a mine. He flew back to Port Moresby that afternoon. December 10th, 1943. 5th Air Force HQ. The memo that went out was a masterpiece of military understatement. To all WPA maintenance commands, salvage of Category E, stricken airframes. It has come to the attention of this command that severe damage airframes, Cat E, are being improperly utilized. Effective immediately, all Cat E airframes are to be re-evaluated for composite repair. RAF and USAF maintenance units are authorized, on a provisional basis, to experiment with non-standard airframe repair to achieve operational status. Be damn sure they fly. The Frankenbomber program was unofficially born. All up and down the coast of New Guinea, on a dozen muddy airstrips, the boneyards were suddenly hives of activity. Mechanics, inspired by the Dobodura memo, began their own experiments. They built A-20 Stans, A-20 Havoc bodies with Boston wings. They built P-40 Kawas, P-40 fuselages with salvaged and superior Kawasaki engines from captured Japanese wrecks. It was chaotic, it was dangerous, and it put dozens of combat-ready aircraft back in the sky at a fraction of the cost and in zero time. Jack O'Reilly, the Queensland mechanic, had just given the 5th Air Force a new invisible squadron. The Mongrel program, as it became known, was pure improvisation. It was a blank check for every creative, frustrated, and grease-stained mechanic in the Pacific. Field modifications. Jacko's original Mongrel was just the start. His own crew, emboldened by their success, got creative. The B-25 was already a fearsome strafer, but the Mongrel became a legend. The nose is too light, Jacko. Red Hogan, the pilot, complained after a mission. And I need more firepower. Righto, Jacko said. He and the armorers liberated the nose section from a different wreck, a B-25H model which had a 75mm cannon. The cannon was long gone, but the mounting was there. Jacko didn't have a 75mm, but he did have 4 extra 50 caliber machine guns from a P-38 Lightning. They bolted them in. The Mongrel now bristled with 12 forward-firing 50 caliber guns. It was no longer a bomber. It was a flying buzzsaw. They used it for low-level parafrag drops, where it would come in at treetop level, suppress all ground fire with a solid wall of lead, and drop fragmentation bombs on Japanese supply dumps. Other squadrons followed suit. At the Marilenen Strip, a USAAF crew built a Super Mongrel B-24 Liberator, using the wings from a different, less damaged B-24. They armored the cockpit with steel plating cut from a Japanese shipwreck in the bay. Enemy countermeasures. The Japanese were not stupid. Their intelligence reports from Rabaul and Wewak became confused, then alarmed. Pilots reported engaging RAF bombers, killing them, and seeing them fly away. Ground observers reported that No. 18 Squadron's airfield was a ghost field. Its wrecks disappeared at night. Most chillingly, their operational losses spiked. Japanese convoys, once safe under a protective fighter umbrella, were being shredded by lone, aggressively flown bombers that appeared from nowhere and were unusually resistant to 20mm cannon fire. Their response was logical. If the Allies were using wrecks as a resource, the wrecks must be destroyed. The Japanese air raids on Dobodura changed. They stopped pattern bombing the runway. They began, with terrifying precision, to incendiary bomb the boneyards. January 14, 1944, 03, Yao. Another condition read, but this time, the bombers came in low. They ignored the slit trenches in the operations tent. They dropped a string of incendiaries directly on Jacko's boneyard. The magnesium-fueled fires lit the night sky as bright as day, the hiss of the flames competing with the roar of the engines. Jacko and his crew weren't in the trenches. They were in the boneyard, with fire extinguishers and shovels, frantically trying to save their inventory. They were fighting to save junk. They lost the Kookaburra's original fuselage and 2 spare wings. It was a devastating blow. The next morning, Jacko stood looking at the smoking, melted slag. "They're learning, lads," he said, his face black with soot. "We're not just fighting them in the air, we're fighting them for the scraps." The war of logistics had just become a war of salvage. Success has its own gravity, and gravity pulls things down. Jacko Riley, the man who just wanted to fix things, was now a somebody. He was promoted to warrant officer and put in charge of composite airframe regeneration for the entire WW2 sector. He was no longer a mechanic. He was a manager, and he hated it. He now had a desk, a sheet of aluminum on 2 oil drums, and a mountain of paperwork. The very bureaucracy he had bypassed was now his to command, and it was a nightmare. The logistical cost, Flight Lieutenant Davies, the by-the-book engineering officer, was Jacko's new deputy. He was a man on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "Jacko, I can't do this," he protested, waving a sheaf of papers. "This is Mongrel 4, the B-24 you built. It has a Pratt & Whitney engine on the port inner and a Wright on the port outer. They use different spark plugs. They have different TBOs. I have no maintenance logs, no part numbers. What do I order? How do I keep it flying?" "You write down what you did, and that's the new log," Jacko said, not looking up. "It's chaos. It's not sustainable." "It's not supposed to be sustainable, Davies," Jacko snapped. "It's supposed to get us through next week." The human cost. The Mongrel program bred overconfidence. At a nearby airstrip at Gooseup, a hotshot USAAF maintenance chief tried to one-up Jacko. He built a Mongrel A-20 from 3 different wrecks. He cut corners. He didn't retension the control cables properly. He wanted it done in 48 hours. The plane took off, climbed to 500 feet, and its tail sheared off. The pilot and his gunner, 2 young men from Ohio, were lost. The report landed on Jacko's desk. The cause: catastrophic structural failure at non-standard fuselage join. Jacko sat in his hut for a long time that night, the report in his hand. His innovation, his idea, had just killed 2 men. The moral consequence, the burden fell on him. He was now the man who had to say no. February 2nd, 1944. WW2. Bluey Dawson, now a sergeant, came to him, his eyes shining. "Jacko, we've done it. We've got that crashed P-38. We think we can mount its superchargers on the Mongrel's engines. We'll get another 50 knots at altitude." The old Jacko would have been grabbing a wrench. The new warrant officer Riley looked at the schematics. "No," Jacko said. "What?" "But Jacko." "No," Jacko said, his voice hard. "You're mixing the fuel-to-air ratios. You'll detonate the cylinders. The R-2600s can't take that much pressure." "We can try," Bluey argued. "We don't try." Jacko slammed his fist on the desk, scattering shell casings. "We don't try. We do what we know. You're not just building a hot rod, Sergeant. You're building a weapon. And if you get it wrong, a pilot, a man you know, doesn't come home. The answer is no." Bluey stared at him, his face falling. He looked at his old friend like he was a stranger. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice flat. He left the tent. Jacko sat down, the weight of command settling on him like the jungle humidity. He was sending men up in planes he knew were barely holding together. He was the only one who knew how to sign them off. He was the one who had to decide what was genius and what was a death trap. He picked up the report on the Gooseup crash and tore it in half. Then he started to write a new manual. RIAF Provisional Guide to Composite Airframe Repair. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was the man who had to make sure his idea didn't kill his own men. The New Guinea campaign peaked and broke in 1944. The brutal attritional air war that Jacko's Mongrel fleet was built for paid its dividend. The isolation of Rabaul, the primary strategic goal, was achieved not by a bloody invasion, but by strangulation from the air. The Mongrel bombers played a crucial if unsung role. They were the expendable, low-level strikers that went in ahead of the main force. They took on the high-risk, low-altitude missions against Japanese coastal defenses and supply barges. The Mongrel itself, the original Bitzer, met its end not in a blaze of glory, but in a mundane, muddy accident. On a return from a mission to Wewak, a sudden storm turned the Dobodura strip into a lake. The pilot, a new replacement, landed long. The plane hydroplaned off the runway and into a ditch, where its patched-up, overstressed frame simply broke in two. The crew walked away without a scratch. Jacko was there, watching them pull the pilot out. "She's done, Jacko," the pilot said, apologizing. "You're alive, aren't you?" Jacko replied. Then she did her job. He didn't salvage it. The war had moved on. By mid-1944, the floodgates of American industrial might had finally opened. New, gleaming B-25Js and P-47s were arriving by the crate load. The Mongrel program, born of desperation, was no longer needed. The official memos from HQ were now about standardization and returning to technical orders. Jacko's provisional repair guide was quietly filed away. The Franken bombers were grounded, one by one, and sent to the real scrapyard. The immediate legacy was not one of shining medals. It was one of numbers. In the critical 8-month period from November 1943 to June 1944, the composite airframe program was credited with adding an estimated 40 new airframes to the 5th Air Force's order of battle. This was the equivalent of 2 full bomber squadrons. It was a force that existed on no official ledger, a ghost force that had tipped the balance in the war of attrition. September 1st, 1944, Dobodura. The squadron was packing up, moving forward to a new base in Biak. Squadron leader Thomas, promoted to wing commander, called Jacko to his tent. "The war's not over, Riley, but our part in it here is." Thomas pushed a small velvet-covered box across the table. "This came through from Canberra." Jacko opened it. Inside was the British Empire Medal, BM. It was not a medal for valor. It was a medal for meritorious service. The citation was read by Thomas in the empty, humid tent. For Warrant Officer Jack Riley, for exceptional ingenuity, resourcefulness, and technical skill in the face of adverse conditions, his refusal to accept defeat and his innovative methods of aircraft repair were instrumental in maintaining the operational tempo of the squadron during a critical phase of the New Guinea campaign. Jacko looked at the medal. "Thank you, sir." He put it in his pocket. "What will you do now, Jacko?" Thomas asked. Jacko looked out at the flight line, where a brand new, shiny B-25 was being refueled. "I hear they're having engine trouble in Biak. The new fuel mix is fouling the plugs. I reckon I'll go have a look." He walked out of the tent, the medal forgotten, already thinking about the next problem. Toowoomba, Queensland, Australia, April 25th, 1995. The Anzac Day parade was over. The streets, littered with streamers and smelling of spilled beer, were quiet. Jack Riley sat on the porch of his small timber house, a cup of tea in his hand. He was 78 years old. His hands, though wrinkled, were still stained black in the creases, a lifetime of grease and oil that no soap could wash away. After the war, he had returned to Queensland. He opened a garage, Riley's Reliable Repairs. He fixed tractors, utes, and harvesters. He was known as a man who could make anything run. He never spoke of the war, not to his wife, not to his children. The British Empire Medal sat in a biscuit tin at the back of a drawer, next to a collection of odd-sized bolts. A young woman sat opposite him, holding a tape recorder. She was a historian from the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, collecting oral histories. "So, Warrant Officer Riley," she began. "Jacko," he corrected, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Just Jacko." "Jacko, then. We've been through the records. We've talked to General Kenny's adjutant, or his notes, rather, and Squadron Leader Thomas's letters. They all mention you. They all mention the Mongrel." Jacko took a sip of tea. He looked out at his shed, where a 1940s-era Fordson tractor sat, gleaming and fully restored. "She was a pig," he said, more to himself than to her. "A bloody pig to fly." "The Mongrel program," the historian pressed. It's credited by some analysts with keeping the RAF flying in late '43. They said it was a force multiplier in the war of attrition. They called you a genius. Jacko let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like grinding gears. Genius? Nah, love. Genius is for officers. We just had a job to do. We were short on bits, that's all. You're on a farm, your header breaks down, and it's 100 miles to the nearest town. What do? You don't whinge. You don't write a report. You fix it. He leaned forward, his eyes, still sharp, fixing on hers. You don't throw something out just 'cause it's broken. You find a way to make it work. Doesn't matter if it's a tractor or a bomber. The job's the same. The historian was quiet for a moment. But the risk? The men you sent up in those planes. Jacko's gaze drifted. You do your best. You check every wire. You tighten every bolt. You kick the tires. And then, you let it go. You have to. 'Cause the only thing worse than sending them up is keeping them on the ground while the world burns. He was quiet for a long time, lost in a memory of mud and sweat, and the sound of a Wright R-2600 roaring to life. The historian finally turned off the recorder. She left him there, on his porch, a quiet old man in a quiet town. Jacko finished his tea. He stood up, his joints aching, and walked into his shed. He ran a hand along the cool, painted metal of the old tractor. On the wall, hanging from a nail next to a set of spanners, was a single, small, cracked, and faded photograph. It was barely legible. A B-25 sitting in the mud. It was half green, half silver, with a crudely painted, aggressive-looking kangaroo on the nose. The mongrel. He looked at the photo, nodded once, and picked up a wrench. He had a carburetor to rebuild.